A warm welcome to Diplomatic Channel. I'm Amarachi Ubani. We have quite a packed program for you. First is recent developments in Syria with President Bashar al-Assad out of government and the rebels of the HTS in. My first guest on the program, Professor Chris Isike, discusses what happened over the weekend, plus outcome of Nigerian President Bola Tinubu's recent trip to South Africa for the Nigeria-South Africa Binational Commission. Later on, I'll speak with former Nigerian ambassador to Burundi, Ambassador Elijah Onyagba, on his observations as a member of the ECOWAS division of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to the Ghana elections they held on Saturday. We'll begin right away this week. The Arab Spring sprung in Syria, with rebel forces now claiming to be in control of the country, ending President Bashar al-Assad's 24-year reign, the president having succeeded his father, Hafiz al-Assad, in 2000. The Assad family having ruled Syria since 1971. He has reportedly fled to an unknown location. What happened over the weekend is the culmination of activities last week when a coalition of opposition groups in Syria, headed by the Islamist faction, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, launched a major offensive against pro-government forces on November 27. The first attack came at the front line between opposition-held Idlib and the neighboring governorate Aleppo. 3 days later, the opposition fighters took Syria's second-largest city, Aleppo. Fighting continued all week until Sunday morning, when the rebel forces claimed to have entered Damascus. There's an active search ongoing for the president in Damascus, even though Syrian ally Russia says Bashar al-Assad has left Syria. Head of the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights Monitoring Group reported that a plane believed to be carrying Assad left Syria via Damascus International Airport before the army's security forces left the facility. Leaders from Western countries have welcomed news of the end of Assad's rule. French President Emmanuel Macron said on social media, "The barbaric state has fallen at last." Then he went on to pay tribute to the Syrian people. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz called Assad's fall good news and urged a political solution to stabilize Syria. Even the UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer followed shortly, saying that he welcomes the fall of Bashar al-Assad's barbaric regime. I want to bring in now Professor of African Politics and International Relations in the Department of Political Sciences at the University of Pretoria. He's also Director of African Center for the Study of the United States at the University of Pretoria in South Africa, Professor Chris Isike. He's currently in the U.S. state of Pennsylvania, from where he joins us. Professor Isike, thank you for joining us on the program.
Thank you, and thank you for having me. Good morning to you and to, it's actually afternoon your time. So good afternoon to you and your viewers.
Of course, at the time of this recording, I had initially agreed to discuss President Bola Tinubu's visit to South Africa, but here we are, getting ready to discuss a more recent development, and that's the upturn of events in Syria. Now, President Bashar al-Assad is still being looked for. I think the rebels really need to get a hold on him. Under the current circumstances in Syria, where do you think he could be hiding, or do you agree with the Russian government that says that he fled the country before the rebels got to Damascus?
Well, I think that he's more likely to be in Russia than anywhere else. That will provide a safer haven for him. He's not likely to live anywhere in the Middle East. So I believe that he would be in Russia. I think for security reasons, they may not want to indicate clearly where he is for now.
Yes, and I'm looking at all of the response from the world leaders, many of them from outside of the Middle East, of course. But the only one from the Middle East, two I remember distinctly from the Middle East, the Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, welcoming the end of the Assad regime, but then being concerned about what could happen afterwards, especially with the rebels, in case they have any ideas towards Israel. And then the Turkish government saying that they are supporting the whoever begins to rule Syria at this point, whichever rebel forces, they're willing to help the country navigate through this political crisis into stability. And then the UK Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, saying that he welcomes the response. The French president, I think, was one of the first Western leaders to comment on the issue. He also welcoming the demise, the end of the Assad regime for a family that's been in power for 24 years. Assad himself been in power for 24 years. I remember Syria was one of the countries amongst the Arab Spring in 2011, but that died down really quick. But of all the other countries, Libya, Tunisia, and Egypt, there was a lot of instability at the time of the upturn, of these governments. And we watched things go from bad to worse. I'm just wondering at this point, um, are you concerned about the rebel takeover in Syria and what that could mean for the country and for the region?
And really, that's the question, because every crisis presents opportunities, and then opportunities also lead to new crises. So for instance, we know that the two crises that have caused this downfall of Assad was the damage to Hezbollah by Israel, and then drain on Russia's resources, military and non-military, because of its war in Ukraine. Now, these two have presented an opportunity for anti-Assad forces to retrieve, taking over and toppling him, and they've succeeded. The opportunity that presents is the formation of a new government in Syria, like you said. Not just him, but his family have held sway over, Syria for over 50 years now. But the potential crisis that can come from it, and this is linked directly to your question, is the disparate movements that have formed this new HTS a group that seem to be on top of things right now. They are it used to be an extremist group, although they've said now that they moderated a bit. But the potential crisis is that it is going to be a lot of infighting, a long infighting, just like the one we saw in Libya after the toppling of Gaddafi. And you could also even say similar to the one we saw in Iraq after the removal of Saddam. So we could have an establishment of a radical, Sunni Islamic government, like the one we have in Afghanistan. And what will happen is that this will create a lot of fears among minorities in Syria. And also even for Israel and Jordan, both of which are friendly to the US. So the point I'm making is that it's all well for a lot of these countries to welcome the change, to welcome the fact that finally a dictator is out of the way. But we must worry about the potential for a crisis from infighting, from fragmentation within, as well as what that can mean for the broader region, including the United States itself.
What do you think could happen to Assad if he's eventually found? And then other members of his government, because they're also missing. I think one of the members of the cabinet did release a video message online saying that he's willing to work with, to negotiate with whichever group decides to take over Syria. They're willing to navigate this season with with whichever group is in power.
Yeah, it's a difficult one actually, but look, the potential is there for peace. Like I said, the opportunities to change of government, and fragmentation from within. But it can also present opportunities for new relations, new regional powers to erupt from all of this.
What do you think could happen to Assad if he's eventually found? If his location is finally known and then those rebels are able to get their hands on him.
Okay, sorry. Yeah. Look, typically, I think that if they can find him, if he's not killed on the spot, depending on the amount of forces that will be around him at the time, he would end up being tried for crimes against humanity. A lot of these he committed in 2011, and he was tolerated then by the US because of your first question around what it would mean for stability, the fight against ISIS in the region, in the country, and also in the broader implications for the region. So that's the reason why the US were a bit soft in responding to it. They did not approach him the way they approached Libya, and this was Obama in 2011. So as a result, he did commit a pogrom of some sort in certain regions of Syria, and he could be held accountable for those. I think that if he's found alive and he makes it out without any kind of threats to his life, he could end up facing the International Criminal Court of Justice, the ICC.
We'll have to wait and see what happens in Syria. Thank you for answering those questions. We had to respond to the news currently making the rounds at this time. The Syrian President Bashar al-Assad reportedly fled the country, as well as the HTS taking control of Damascus and other major cities in Syria. Now, I want to talk about President Bola Tinubu's visit to South Africa. One of the major achievements, I would say, is the agreement to simplify visa application process for qualified Nigerian business people, granting them the 5-year multiple entry visas. And then there's also the e-visa application system where tourists can apply for a visa without needing to submit their passports. This must have struck the right nerve amongst Nigerians because I remember even before the president's visit, a lot of people said this is the issue he needs to attend to. Would you say this is a major achievement of the Nigeria-South Africa Binational Commission this time round?
Well, it's welcome, but it's not really an achievement per se because so the e-visa thing has been on for some time, but many Nigerians complain that when they apply, they do not get feedback. All right, so many have even argued that it's a deliberate ploy just to give the impression that there is a relaxation of visa regime, a special dispensation for Nigeria, which doesn't really always turn out to be successful for them. So it's about implementation. It's one thing to stand in front of podiums in media and make these declarations, but when it comes down eventually to the actual mechanics of how this is implemented by both sides, and especially on the South African side, because if you look at the relations between both in terms of trade, it's skewed in favor of South Africa. And that's why even the President Ramaphosa himself did acknowledge that they want to see more Nigerian businesses in South Africa. The question is how that will be implemented, whether it will be implemented in good faith, not just by the government itself, but policy implementers, street-level bureaucrats who, because of their own interpretation of laws, tend to always do an overreach when it comes to Nigeria, especially. So the real challenge is going to be in the implementation of these, visa regimes that has been announced.
But what else could the Nigeria-South Africa Binational Commission have addressed? I mean, you had the top government people there, which is President Tinubu and then President Ramaphosa. How could they have further utilized this 2 days that they both spent together in South Africa to discuss issues affecting both countries?
Well, they did come out with a couple of agreements, and the meeting, like you said, it was very high level. Two presidents who have been in the business sector, so understand the importance of business. And we tell our South African colleagues here when they complain about the difference they think South Africa, especially President Ramaphosa, has towards Nigeria, and we tell them that it's more out of a self-enlightened interest than any particular law for Nigeria, because South Africa recognizes that it has a lot to benefit from Nigeria. Talking about lithium, for instance, South Africa is interested in powering industrialization, and recognizes that if it deals with Nigeria well, it can get the lithium that it needs to power electric batteries for its electric vehicle industry, right? The auto industry. So they did come out with a couple of good points. One of the things I thought was also useful was the memorandum of understanding on early warning systems. To highlight the eruption of violence between citizens of both countries before they erupt. And this is where the relationship is really tricky at the people-to-people level between Nigerians and South Africa. In South Africa, less so in Nigeria. Nigeria normally retaliates when we have xenophobic attacks, or what we call Nigerphobia, attacks against Nigerians in South Africa. So they've done well in terms of the top level meetings, but they need to do more in terms of actually speaking to their peoples, and this more on the South African side, about the value that Nigeria presents to South Africa as a country. It doesn't mean that Nigerians should then have a free check, a blanket check to do as they please. But a lot of the problems we have lie with the law enforcement in South Africa, their inability to implement their own laws. And when people take advantage of them, it then becomes the problem of those people per se. So there's a lot that needs to be done to improve people-to-people relations, between both countries.
Your analysis, always appreciated here on Diplomatic Channel. Coming up after the break, Ambassador Elijah Onyeagba's thoughts on Ghana's recent general elections. Stay with us. Let's turn now to the elections in Ghana, where the presidential candidate of the ruling New Patriotic Party, who incidentally is Ghana's vice president, Mahamudu Bawumia, has accepted defeat in Saturday's poll. Bawumia says the people voted for change. As of Sunday, there'd been no official results declared in the election. According to the Electoral Commission, results had been delayed because supporters of the two main parties were impeding the process, and it had asked the police to clear the collation centers. I want to bring in now former Nigerian ambassador to Burundi, Ambassador Elijah Onyeagba, who incidentally was an observer in this election with the ECOWAS division of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So you were our eyes on the ground in Ghana. Ambassador Onyeagba, thank you for joining us on Diplomatic Channel.
Thank you so very much. It's great being on your studio once again.
And I'm very eager to hear and to learn of your observations on Saturday's poll. What are your thoughts on the conduct of the Ghanaian elections?
Thank you so very much. I think that the elections actually went very peaceful, which is the number one observation. And if you come to Ghana, one of the things you will notice is that there's a peaceful nature of the people. People moved around their normal businesses. There wasn't even like anything like tension, that will make you feel that there's a presidential and parliamentary election coming up. So a day before the elections, we were properly briefed by the ECOWAS, by African Union, by the Commonwealth, and of course by the Nigerian Embassy in the Nigerian High Commission in Ghana, just to sort of give us a political background of Ghana, what to expect, what not to expect in the course of our work. And then, of course, the elections was scheduled to commence at 7 a.m. the next morning. And interestingly, the election actually commenced at that particular point in time because we were already out where the centers where we were monitoring some minutes before 7 a.m. in the morning. And it's instructive to note that materials actually got there very early enough in the morning, that in such a way that once it was 7 a.m. in the morning, voting started. They commenced the accreditation process. It was a very smooth process. The venues where they cast their votes or the polling units were like schools or fields where there are big spaces. The Electoral Commission had their canopies, had their staff on ground. One of the things to note in the process is that also there were a lot of women participation. In my estimation, there were between 35 to 40% women participation in the elections. In my estimation, they also planned for the disabilities because they had chairs where people that were disabled could sit, and then of course they gave them priorities to vote first. So it was largely a peaceful process. People were not very close to the voting areas, and because it was two elections, the presidential election and the parliamentary elections, if you come and accredit yourself, they will give you the first ballot paper, which is for the presidential elections. You go and print and cast your vote there. You come back again and collect the one for the parliamentary elections. And the reason why, when I tried to find out why are they not, giving both at the same time, they said they don't want confusion, that a lot of people may not be educated enough to know where to put which ballot paper. So you have to go first, do the one for the presidential election, and then you come back again and do the one for the election. So it was largely a peaceful process. We also went back again much later in the day during counting. The election was between 7 a.m. and 5 p.m. in the evening. And then, of course, during counting, we also observed the process. It was also a very smooth process. And it went on very well. And there wasn't really so much issues where we monitored, even though while I was watching the TV later on, I heard that somewhere around the border region or some of the constituencies near the border of Togo, that they had people that died and they had some fightings going on. But largely, you could analyze the election to say that it was very peaceful. Issue number one is that they had people that were moving across freely. Elections in Ghana is not, you won't find restriction of movement where they can say you won't move from one state to the other, you won't move from one region to the other. Everybody moved around their businesses, as though it's a normal day. Shops were open, hawkers were doing their business. So you just go and cast your vote and you continued with your life. So that is actually something I find a bit more interesting, because improvements we will have to find a way to inculcate into our own system. Because when we have by-elections in Nigeria, say, for example, in Ondo State, you have a situation where people are unable to, nearby states are unable to pass through. If you are moving from Lagos to Edo, for example, you find out that you are unable to come through just as a result of the fact that elections is taking place in one state. And we also didn't see a lot of military presence, because as part of the briefings, we were rightly told that the military said they were never going to get involved in the election. And the only grounds for them to get involved is on the instruction of the Inspector General of Police to maintain law and order at the point where they are called upon. And that, in fact, if voters see military officers near any polling booth, that they should actually report that military officer. So they made it very clear they were never going to get involved. And it was largely a peaceful process. The police were also there, but unarmed. They were unarmed, but you had police presence, but never close to where votings were going on.
The fact that the vice president, who is the presidential candidate of the NPP, the ruling party, considered defeat and then called the opposition presidential candidate John Mahama, who has been a former president of the country from 2012 to 2017, and congratulated him on winning the election. Yet the Electoral Commission has not announced who has won this election. Your thoughts on that pretty quickly?
This is a new level for me in politics or in election observation, because before these elections, when we came in, I tried to understand what the issues in the elections were. The ruling party has been in power for 8 years. And historically in Ghana, no party since 1992 has ruled the country for more than 8 years. So they have this sequence of either 4 years or 8 years for a particular political party. Remember that the candidate of the NDC is a former president of this country. And he also lost election after 4 years. The NPP, which is the ruling party, the present, government, won 8 years ago, and he conceded defeat. And then, of course, they went ahead to be in power for 8 years. So in this election, I saw some things like, the campaign slogan, the NDC, which is the opposition candidate, used the campaign slogan, reset. Just to come and reset, vote for reset of the economy. In this election, a couple of issues were on the front burner. Number one is the economy. Number two is unemployment. Quite a lot of young people were out. Number three is illegal mining. A lot of young people were interested in the elections. Ghana have got a population of about 34 million, with about 18.7 million registered voters coming out to vote in these elections. So these were the issues at play. And this is also the first time the Ashantis are the majority in terms of population in Ghana. But this is the first time non-Ashanti is actually being on the ballot paper. So the two candidates were from the northern region of the country. But again, this is also the first time that a Muslim which is about 20% of the population of Ghana, is running for an election in Ghana. So it was, and he's also a sitting vice president who has, a lot of people look at him as a digital person sitting in for the young people. A lot of people that I spoke to, some people said that 4 years will not be enough for Dramani to make any change. It is better to go 8 years, to go to someone that has the opportunity of staying 8 years. So the MPP, which is the ruling party, was also trying to break the 8 years jinx in Ghana. So these were the issues before the elections. But and the elections, we observed what has happened and we came back. And then sometime about 9:35 this morning, first of all, at 9:30, there was a news flash that the president is the vice president, which is the candidate of the ruling party, will make a speech. And then surprisingly, I tuned in, and then the man said that he had just received reports from all of the people he had in the field, and that he can conclude, even before the result is announced, that the opposition party, the former president, had won the elections. And even though that the result has not been made official, that even when it is made official, it will not change anything for him. And therefore, he had already called him to congratulate him, and that for him, it is important for the international community, for investors in Ghana, to understand that they have come of age with respect to their democratic process, and that Ghana was much more important than all of these processes, and that he was doing this to calm the tension around the whole country, so that people will begin to go about their normal business and now wait for that process to be concluded. This I found very novel. I mean, it's quite interesting because, quite in a lot of other places, even when you know you're losing, you either try to do something that will disrupt the process. Even when you know you're losing, you try to do something that, even after the result has been announced, people head to court. Some people head to court, and then we stretch it from tribunal to appeal, and in some cases, the Supreme Court, creating another market for lawyers, and of course, looking at opportunities of finding a way to penetrate our judiciary, and quite a lot of these issues. So that announcement he made and conceding that election brought down the entire attention of people that were, a lot of people were saying even people that died shouldn't have died. Why should they, risk their lives and try to fight for this?
Yes, it did. I look forward to hearing more of this. In fact, I know that even before this interview airs, I'm going to have a long conversation with you. There seems to be a lot more that you have to talk about. Thank you so much for saying this much on Diplomatic Channel.
Thank you so very much. It's my pleasure once again.
And that's the program this week. Don't forget, your comments are super important, especially on today's topics. I'm Amarachi Ubani. I'll see you next time.